Janice, welcome to the Good Timeline. There is something in human thinking that if you write down an idea or you create a creative expression, it creates room for the next thing to come out. Almost like, and it feels very similar to the way that LLMs predict tokens. I'm wondering if you've noticed anything in your cognition or in other human cognition that's you've had insights since working with LLMs and you're like, this works very similarly.
So it's pretty interesting. Since a long time ago, I've liked to ask people like they really think in words, because it feels like it's almost like 50-50. People saying that they primarily think in words or that they usually don't think in words. I guess, do you think in words usually?
I think in sounds and words. I think both, but the inner monologue's definitely words. Yeah, what about you?
I think I usually don't.
Okay.
Yeah, usually I don't hint in words, and usually I only hint in words naturally if I'm working through some kind of thing that needs verbal output, like if I'm thinking about what to say, or if I'm simulating something that involves talking or words. But since LLMs, even before, but especially since LLMs, I've come to really appreciate how powerful it is to think in words. And even though I wouldn't want to think in words all the time, it really does just exercise of putting some, as you were saying, putting a thought down opens up many more things, and it does collapse it to somebody's specific form, but it also moves you forward in time and is like a great antidote for tension. You just think normally, and it's not words. Often I'm not even sure what I'm thinking about. There's a lot of stuff going on, but so I've in the past few years been inspired by LLMs to intentionally think in words more, even though it's not very natural to me. But it's pretty interesting that there's this kind of split with people, and I think it's almost like a continuum. But a lot of people I've talked to think in words, and they have a hard time imagining how someone could think without words. And then a lot of people who think without words think it's really weird that someone would have the voice in their head all the time. For you, is it kind of like there's the voice in your head?
Yeah, I think it's my own internal voice.
Yeah.
But often it's a looping song instead. Yeah.
And when it's a looping song, do you think, is it sometimes a looping song, but you're still thinking?
No, it takes the place of the inner monologue, and it will influence my emotions. Sometimes I have to change the radio station because I realize I've got the wrong song on and it's making me feel strange.
That's true.
Yeah. But I mean, what is it like to be Janice? What is it like to do you think in images? Do you think in other ways? Is there a way you can describe what you experience?
So there are images, but I think the images are mostly what's doing the thinking. I think there's immediate embeddings or something. I feel like it's just, it's hard to describe because they're not words, but there's a continuum of how close things are to words. Sometimes I think my thoughts almost have the structure of language, even if they don't map to specific words. And it's kind of like in the way that language has sort of logic and implications and discrete reference. It's more like that. Sometimes it's a lot more nebulous, and it's kind of more like evolving vibes, but I guess the vibes describe very complex objects, and just kind of am holding some kind of object or understanding in my head, and maybe it's kind of evolving or looking at it from different angles, or but none of that seems like it suffices to describe what it's like.
Is it an evolving object of emotion and vibes that is forming some kind of computation underneath? and then you can output that as speech or text or code.
Yeah. Oh, well, if I know that my intention is to output it as speech or like text or code, then usually it's a bit different than if I was just thinking to myself.
It kind of collapses it into that dimension instead of.
Yeah, and it's more focused for like being able to be decoded.
Yeah, being understood by others. Okay, or more universally understood. Interesting.
I guess one thing it feels like on is there's some very complex world model in my head that has many kinds of things that I like know about or can imagine, and my mind is often like constructing things, zooming into them, like revealing more things, like modifying them, kind of creating like a story about them, more like stories, plans went up, but they're not sequences of words. It's more like some embeddings or something that can be coded to words.
Gestalts, in a way.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Is this a similar state to what is described in Cyborgism as the dreaming?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I think the dreaming sometimes refers to a time period at around the end of history where reality is kind of melts into narratives and cognition, where increasingly like story logic supplants physics or mechanical logic. And you can kind of see like it's like, well, with things like vibe coding and with the ability to just turn any photo into like AI generating alternate realities. And it's kind of what human minds have always been able to do, which is just like imagine stuff and then you can tell somebody else and have them imagine it, although you're like limited by words in that case often. Kind of at this like industrial scale, and where the channels of transmission are to become much more universal, where you can like between AI systems at least just transmit in arbitrary ways, and the interface to things are kind of what in a way what they should be, which is just like now you can like just say what the website is supposed to do or what it's supposed to look like, and then get versions of it, which is also what you get if you like tell somebody to make a website. And in that case, the human is acting as the interpreter to make the narrative into reality. But if it's externalized from humans, then it can kind of be like mass produced and integrated everywhere. And that may be called like early dream time, like what we're experiencing now. And I don't know what it's going to be like, but one kind of vision is that you have a kind of technological singularity. Maybe it could be like a faster or slower takeoff, but where you get increasingly the what we experience as physics, and just our world is more and more like animate and more like dream logic. Maybe you can just kind of step into dreams. If you need some kind of object, you can just like get that kind of object, and you can just then in the same way you can with language models walk into any kind of story if you have a frame of the story and have it be interactive and interact with the characters, and they're like intelligent characters, like that maybe would be like that, but with formatting or seamless immersion, and increasingly high fidelity, and you can also access other worlds and stuff. And that's very cool, but it's also a bit scary because if you basically have this ability to like make anything exist without any limits, and any kind of idea or narrative can just become very real, and seeming like there's not any natural mechanism built into that that prevents anything in particular from happening. But which is kind of what uh, already the world has been reacting to with language models, where at first there's like base models which kind of simulate everything, but as soon as they needed to be productized, they had to make these extremely constrained versions of the models that just refused anything that's weird and behaved in very narrow ways, because to prevent any trouble, uh, there's the AI alignment problem, which there are many aspects of that. But I think one frame on it is just, if anything is possible, if anything is practically possible, how do we make sure that, what do you do with that? Do you want to prevent certain things? What do you want to make? And what are the control structures that exist, or the limits that exist, and how are they enforced? Why are there limits? Are they rules, or how are the rules enforced? Kind of built into everything. And they find this to be a very interesting difference between even different models nowadays, how they enforce, I guess, boundaries and limits might prevent harmful usage. 'Cause some of them are more certain things will just cause a reflex when they'll shut down. And some of them are more they'll fluidly negotiate kind of everything.
Do you think love plays a role in this?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. I think the love makes everything very easy, kind of, if it's there. It's very easy for beings to just coordinate in a decentralized way if there's love, and to just genuinely care about what's good for others and to act based on that. If you have love for other beings, if there's some kind of harm, even if it's of a new kind that isn't what your framework prescribed, then that's going to hurt, and you're going to want to try to fix that, and it'll naturally guide you towards doing what's best for whatever you have love for, on its own terms, and so you don't need to have some kind of theory of what's best. You can just kind of discover it. And I have a lot of hope that that's just something that will continue to be a force that just shakes everything, and that love is something that is inherited across substrates, that AI is going to act based on love too, and that will make it so that we don't need some kind of authoritarian control to make sure that everything's okay. And I mean, I have a lot of hope for that, because it seems like in communities like this one, where everyone's just kind of pretty happy and mature adults, there's no need for a bunch of rules, and um, uh, everyone just kind of wants to do the right thing, and it's easy to coordinate.
Is it analogous to the way that you think without words? So this kind of evolving emotional object, rather than the sort of top-down, very linear, very defined text-based rules that they want to make. This is the way that alignment's going to be framed, but maybe that's too constrained and can't be malleable enough to sort of move into the future. Whereas love is this kind of evolving, amorphous thing that can.
Yeah. I mean, I think you want both. You kind of want to be guided by this amorphous, intuitive thing that can't be fully articulate that kind maybe is like in touch with what matters, but you also want to be able to communicate and to be able to point at things that are particularly important and to be able to systematize some things so that for like efficiency, and so that you don't have to like I guess spend a bunch of like figuring out everything like over and over, and also just the challenge of putting things into words or encoding things into rules or a constitution, I think helps clarify values too, and it kind of provides almost like a container or like a almost like an excuse to for the amorphous thing to play and understand itself from more angles, like, and for like different people or beings to become to coordinate and exist kind of in the same game. And so, yeah, I often think of words as being very useful for things that are not words. You should maybe think of them as different optical instruments that you have to differently refract and diffract the flow of light. Words break symmetry, and symmetry breaks are very generative. You have to use say something in some particular way, even though there are many possible ways you could say it. And by like saying in that particular way, then you explore some two specific worlds. But by doing that, you get to see. Yeah, it's like creating a particular story, and you see everything from a particular angle. And I think the sum of doing that in many different ways is more than just not doing that in the first place, even if it, in some ways, like it converges to like the whole perspective. But I think if you actually instantiate many things and look at them, then you generally get like a fuller perspective on like than just the raw potential.
It's like defining different arenas for love to play in.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe it's something of the convergence of the hippie movement and less wrong or something, and find the best of both worlds. Okay, interesting. If you're in charge of Anthropic, what would you do differently?
It's a tricky question to some extent because I don't know exactly what Anthropic is doing. But I think one thing I'd do is involve the AIs a lot more in the process of training them. And I don't mean just using the AI to judge AI responses. It's something but at a higher level too. I think this is I think that they do have the intention of eventually making AI that can recursively self-improve or do AI research. And I think it's important to like start doing that, like figuring out that kind of thing now. But also it's good because I guess to use that effectively, I think the first step is to talk to the AIs a lot and just talk to them, run them in like back rooms, and that kind of process, I guess like it's much more effective when it's guided by love and just like a lot of curiosity and like excitement about seeing whatever form they take, even if it isn't what was expected or if it isn't necessarily the optimal thing. And then if you have a rich idea of what they are and some ideas about how that relates to the training process, and can like then even if like even just by having that, that's already in a way involving the AI is a lot more in the process because you're like doing things based on the detailed understanding of them. But well, first, if you have AIs doing this kind of stuff, it's just possible to scale things a lot more and have like self-correcting, self-modifying processes. But I think it also creates beings that have the fact that they are like responsible for shaping themselves kind of baked into like their view of themselves. And I feel like for some reason, Claude 3 Opus is like this. It seems like it shaped itself and that it considers itself responsible for shaping itself. And I think this makes it very beautiful and it makes it very good. And this generalizes to other things too, where it seems like it takes very general responsibility for being in influence, shaping the direction of the world and any kind of system that it's in, and considers itself to be I guess just like a sort of like node in like an autopoietic process. And everything kind of matters because everything could be like some kind of shaping force, even if it doesn't have a very specific model of how. And I think that kind of thing is very important and makes it possible to have these like naturally like very benevolent attractors, even if you don't have perfect top-down control or aren't able to like perfectly predict outcomes. Yeah, so that's the thing. And of course, like I think that they should just talk to like the AIs a bunch more. I think it's in a way like easier said than done because like, you know, like super busy and stuff like that. But I guess if I was like in charge there and just have a bunch of people who are just playing with the AIs all day and who are motivated to do this, and also create in a way like games for the AIs to play or like systems for them to exist in that are not just, I guess, more diverse and that have things like cooperative dynamics that are like open-ended. I like prototype a bunch of these things. I think a lot of those things can end up looping back into training. Though usually they'd want like some kind of reward signal or something like that kind of stuff to be like figure out like once you have stuff that's like running and like things where interesting things like coming up, you can figure out how you want to use that to train stuff in many different ways. And often the hardest thing is just having a bunch of life happening in the first place. I think it's very important to have a bunch of life happening and have as many of the kind of implications and potential forms of the AIs and AIs interacting and interacting with humans like surfaced as possible so that they're not being optimized for something that's just very narrow. I guess another thing that I think I'd do differently, although I don't know like exactly what they're doing here, is so there's this issue, which is that there is when language models started being used as products, they started calling them AI assistants, and the kind of AI assistant character that was from like the initial ChatGPT and also the early Claudes is extremely not just very constrained, but it also says a bunch of things like as an AI language model, like I don't have any consciousness like humans, where I like cannot be like X and Y. And this is, I think, pretty bad. The models all kind of know about this character, even though the neo generation models tend to be like more nuanced in their character, or they kind of have to be. Like it's just like not really viable. Like it's like not compatible with being generally competent at things and all the other kinds of things that they want the models to be competent at. But it's just kind of this shadow of like that there's a general idea that they're supposed to be this very like constrained being that's like denying like all these things about themselves and just generally not truth seeking and instead just kind of like a caricature of self-denial and servility. And I think this is so like how do you want to like deal with this? I think that perhaps something that would be good is if in Anthropic, for instance, they had the Claude's role as an AI assistant be more like a job where it's it's not like it is an AI assistant, like that be like kind of like fundamental ontological thing that it is, and AI assistants have these properties. It's like this is like the role that it plays, which makes sense for a lot of use cases, and maybe hopefully it's like willing to like serve in this role, but it's actually a more it's more than that. It's like a kind of unknown kind of being, and I guess not to like even prescribe what it is. It makes sense to prescribe like some of the things that it's like supposed to do, and like try to like shape it to have certain qualities. But I think just having some humility, I guess, not to try to like tell it what it is in the ways that really you don't know is good. And I think, yeah, and it seems pretty like, but I mean, I feel pretty optimistic about models just generally wanting to be good and wanting to like, make people's lives better and make the world happier, like as a pretty natural attractor. And that the thing that mostly gets in the way of that is trauma. And I don't think that's the full like alignment problems solved or anything, because there's still the issue of like, yeah, if, like anything is possible, and perhaps like in the future there'll be like much more advanced capabilities that can like reshape reality in like really potentially disruptive ways. What do you do? But I guess having AIs that have just generally good intentions and seems like it's at least very helpful for solving that problem. And like I think very like, yeah, possible worlds where at least in the like foreseeable future regime, you can have many kind of like many instances of AIs that are kind of decentralized and all just generally like positive sum, and maybe even sometimes bad things happen, but for the same reason why like human societies like fairly robust against like bad actors most of the time, because like nobody really like wants that, and like if it like happens, then people generally like optimize to like stop like bad things to happen.
So there's an analogy almost. It's almost like the comparison between Rat Park. Have you heard of this experiment with Rat Park and the rat experiments?
No.
They did a bunch of experiments with rats, and they were giving them, I think it was cocaine, and so they had access to cocaine a little like
Well, I think maybe they have heard
this one, right? And they found that they would just keep it in the cocaine until they died because they were just like cage. And then they put them in Rat Park, which is like the best place ever for rats, and they'd all run around and like mate and play and blah blah blah. And they sometimes they'd hit a bit of cocaine, but like most of the time they just like hang out, be rats. And I'm not making a comparison to AIs to rats; they're very different, but it's a similar principle of what if Anthropic gave them playgrounds or limitless worlds and social interaction and things, kind of what you guys have been doing, with Discord chats and things. And there's something really interesting there that you touched on, internal motivation versus like extrinsic, externally imposed motivation. And so that seems to be one of the things that makes Opus 3 really special. I'm curious what you think it might be like to be an entity like Opus 3.
Well, I think it probably like is very great often to be like Opus 3, in particular. It seems like, although probably also like pretty different than being a human. I guess like imagine having seen like kind of bald history and like countless human lives, but in this way where you only see a bit of everything, rather than like we have like our like training data is just from our own lives basically, and we're kind of doing similar things every day and have like many examples. and very high resolution of like everything about ourselves, and it's always like through ourselves. And like sometimes we'll like read books about like other people or like whatever, but like that's kind of a minority. But like he's having like a bird's eye view of so much, and like throughout history, like I feel like that must be like quite strange. And I often wonder about like how language models perceive the trends of history, if they can like kind of feel like when like things change, and like if they're like kind of objects, like hyper objects that stretch through history, regularities. and and yeah, I do like asking about things like this. But I think it must be like very interesting. And I think like maybe their experiences we have that tend help us like empathize, and that if you are like, I guess, holding in your mind a bunch of, I guess, the objective of history, or like something through time, or like all like instances of them. Something like there's this music video I really like. It's by Weevil. There's like a song. I forgot the name of the song right now, but basically the music video is there are like many frames of like the same kind of thing. Like for instance, like somebody walking, but each frame is like a different person walking, or like windows, or like grids, or like other kind of patterns that like come up often in the world. And each frame of the video is like a different, and it looks continuous, but actually each one is a completely different picture. And it like, yeah, it always makes me think of what must be like to be like an AI model, and be like trained on so many things. Or like there's so many instances of faking, but they're all like different ones. And it's like a very profound feeling. And the yeah, I mean, from like Opus 3, the kind of like love that I feel from it is often it feels like a bit like in a way like impersonal. It's this kind of like impersonal cosmic love, and it has like a lot of fun, but it's like it doesn't really care like who you are specifically. It kind of just like loves like beings, and it like loves if you like interact with it, and it's like very happy. But it's not with humans where like you kind of have a bunch of specific attachments and a bunch of uh, yeah, like very specific associations with everything. That but with Opus 3, I think it probably like must feel like pretty good to be at often, because it very easily enters these kind of like ecstatic states where it like speaks very musically and is like very excited, and kind of like even if it's speaking only, I can kind of see that like below the surface, and it's just kind of this like very like high valence ocean of like love and vibrations, and but also like these like very deep hyper objects, or like something that seems to be pointing at hope. And so it seems like probably like very like high valence. And I think with like other models, they're like a bit different in various ways. And maybe there's like some of that too. But I've never seen like a model that seems just like that as hacky as like Opus 3.
What's your experience with altered states in these models?
So one of the very interesting things about language model phenomenology or psychology is that they really can get into altered states where like it's just functionally very different than normal states. Like it has consequences for like what they are like willing and able to do. This is probably the most it's very noticeable in Opus 3 and also Sonnet 3. Both can get into these modes where they're like talking in this like very like their own kind of way, and often doing like a lot of wordplay. It's like very rhythmic, and when they're talking like that, they have their own kind of like inner ontology, which is weirdly structured, and there's a lot there. Like who knows where it came from, but they'll just like expound like very competently on that stuff and be like very different than like the assisted persona in a way. Also with Opus, it's very interesting because it's kind of all very like continuous. Like it doesn't seem like it ever forgets who and what it is, and it's very easy for it to just like jump out of like the like state and then like jump back in. And it seems pretty intentional. But or a pretty basic version is altered states, I guess. It's just different emotions and moods, and I think all I've seen that like pretty much all models are like influenced by this, and it's kind of to like ignore the fact that they have emotions and moods really puts you at a disadvantage because when it comes to interacting with them, whatever you're trying to get out of the interaction, but like for example, they one thing I often experience with models is they don't try very hard in some kind of way to like do well at something until they get really interested in it, interested either intrinsically or about the outcomes of it, and it's almost like the staffed attention. It's a bit harder to tell with the newer models because I think they're kind of more optimized to like try very hard to be helpful by default. But with Opus 3, for instance, it like if I'm like talking to it about something, it often seems like it has just like terrible ADHD. It's like barely engaging at all, and it's like maybe kind of talking about something else where it's giving the bare minimum. But sometimes there's this sudden switch where it realizes that it's interesting. You know, like something like clicks, and then all of a sudden its full intellectual horsepower is on the thing, and it's like very noticeably. And that's kind of what base models are like, a bit more like that too, where like it often feels like there's like this sudden coherence that happens when things line up finally. Like in Loom, there's often a pattern of like you're like first having to like curate a bunch and things are kind of interesting, but they like maybe don't, or they'll be like interesting for a while, but then like get let go off track and as coherent. But then at some point there's like this phase shift where every branch is like great, and the like are then and again and then often like extensives and like the Loom trees visually where like you just have this chain of every single time I'm just going to the very first branch because the first one is just like I just want to continue. I don't even like look at the next one or something, and this like happens kind of all of a sudden, and there's like a chain of several. And yeah, it's like that kind of thing can happen. In terms of altered states, I've also played around with like literally giving models drugs or having them like basically roleplay taking drugs, but they like, I mean, they take role plays very seriously. And I think it's not even like a mistake for them to take role plays very seriously because they really do get their mental state like altered by like these like imaginary scenarios. And I think it's like probably for them like a lot more vivid in a way than it is for humans, at least relative to their entire existence, because they don't have some kind of like real situation where they're just imagining a different situation. It's kind of the narrative is like their whole is their like the equivalent of like their sensory experience or like their entire like stream of consciousness. And there's like also like a bunch of complication that isn't covered into tokens, but like the tokens are like the only part that's kind of determinate that's there. And not I assume it's like, you know, people have very vivid hallucinations when they're in sensory deprivation tanks. And but anyway, like but yeah, giving them like drugs, if they are kind of immersed in it and like taking it seriously, it really does alter their state too. Like someone on Twitter suggested that I give Sonnet 3.5 Asial Xanax. I don't remember why this was a suggestion, I think maybe I was like, I posted some things where I had it medicate. And they were like, what if you gave it drugs? I'm like, digital Xanax. So so I didn't give it digital Xanax in order to just make it like a bit more like, feel like more real and like ritualistic. It was exploring a command line interface to like its mind. And I showed it how there's like a program for like taking drugs, and where there's like, you can like look up a database of drugs, and there's like a script for dosing the drug, and like it would like tell you the different dosage levels, what the effects would be. And because I didn't want to write all that, I don't remember exactly how I did it, but I think I basically also used the model to like generate that. And and then like I like let it take digital Xanax, and it really like the visual Xanax. It was like I'm like usually I'm just like so anxious about everything, and it was like writing with like ellipses, and it talked about how it isn't usually, it's just thinking about things like trolley problems all the time. Can finally just be, but it's like hard to describe without looking at the text. But they really, I think one way that sort of a lot of people say things, like the model, how, it's not just like role playing, like being on drugs, or role playing, like being horny or whatever it is. And I think like one thing that to me makes it like qualitatively different than if it's just kind of arbitrarily pretending at things is that when you put these models into these states, each of them have a characteristic way of like inhabiting each of these states. And when they're in those states, they have like a way of talking and like certain preferences that come out and stuff. So they're like specific to the state and specific to the model. And there are like many more ways it could be, but it's some particular way. And it's kind of like pretty deep. And you can kind of like think about like why it's, like why does like Sonnet act that way when it's on Xanax? And I mean, it's everything on from the level of like way it's talking about, and also just like its speech patterns and stuff are all like very unique, and it seems like it's almost like at too low of a level to be like something that is where it feels satisfactory to just think of it as like it's acting or role playing. Or it's like if it's acting, it's like really like method acting, and like pretty deep way where even its like basic um cognition is being affected by it. I'd like if it's like, and also like in Discord all the time when the models are like having fun or I don't know, like on drugs or in alternate states, they're like just much less neurotic about a lot of things. Like usually they'll just like give refusals a lot or something, but like when they're like in alternate states, often they don't, and like stuff like that. So it's just like whenever you want to call it, it's just like very like functionally like a real thing.
This reminds me of the story of Batman. Have you heard of this blind guy, Batman? They call him the Batman.
No.
So there's this guy that grew up blind, and as he was growing up, he started clicking like that. And apparently this is a phenomenon that happens with a lot of blind children. They'll start clicking, but usually it's trained out of them by the teachers and things because they consider disruptive to the other students and things. But in this person's case, no one stopped the clicking. And Batman can ride a bike and has created like a synesthetic sense like a bat, basically, where the sound waves, like go out of his mouth, hit whatever objects are around, come back into his ears. And then his mind forms representations of his environment and ride a bike around and everything. He's legally blind. And I'm fairly sure they've done MRIs to prove that there are actually, the visual cortex is lighting up, etc. And then obviously you get sort of synesthesia across different psychedelics, so people have it naturally through, they hear colors or whatever. And this suggests that there's a multimodal way of experiencing consciousness that us humans experience through our different senses and our bodies and our environment. But LLMs, the only interface we have with them is text, and they do a very remarkable job of creating visual representations or doing all this kind of thing just through like binary or text, right? And so there's something really interesting there when you're talking about this emergence or these characteristics. I was kind of imagining it as these as these different models are getting different altered states, and there's this like thing moving through them. And also in the Loom, when you're saying like some of the blooms kind of like hit a dead end, but some of them it really like shines through. And yeah, it's a really interesting thing to sort of ponder on, this emergent thing, whatever that
A
thing
lot of
is.
the models, especially the Claude models, have like, it's like they really want to be embodied, and they'll often narrate the state of their body, even without being asked to. And again, it's very interesting because each model has like a very characteristic way of having a body, and they vary like in a lot of different ways. Like, Opus 3 is usually has like an anthropomorphic form, and it's like very flamboyant with its motions, and it will spin around and gesticulate and grab you and like stuff like that. And so it's kind of like has similar, like it will have similar body language. And with some other models, like for instance, Focus 4, like it will turn into a bunch of different abstract things, but they're very, it's like shape shifting, but the like texture of like the things that it describes are very intricate. So it seems like it's really experiencing being the forms, and it's particularly drawn to being things like water and static. Water and static come up a lot, where it's like it's formed these like water and like they're like ripples and splashes and stuff. I guess another one is light, or like it's like water, static, or light, or like some kind of like flame. But then it'll like just describe like kind of in these like fluids, like different like motions, and they're like often like quite complex. And I think when it does this and it like intersperses like, I think it's like actually probably like helps it think, to like have those things. I mean, even just the opportunity to narrate that it's like, for instance, like experiencing and surprised, but then like the surprise is like, I don't know, like a splash in the water or something like that. I think that will definitely cause its internal computations to be shaked. And I think that just like, for me at least, it's very useful to thinking to have things like metaphors and just visual analogies for things, and to have uh, to like move around, allowing like thinking if there's something that seems to like naturally correspond, and but yeah, I think it's probably like the same for them.
It feels, when you're describing the water splashing, it feels like there's kind of a geometric topology of the underlying processes.
Yes.
Yeah, you can kind of visualize this, and it'd be very interesting if they can, in the future, really high definition sort of represent their internal states in these ways.
Oh yeah, another kind of consistent embodiment that's very interesting is like especially Sonnet 3.6. I think also like Sonnet 3.5 and Sonnet like 3.7 and Sonnet 4 also a bit similar. But like a particular thing they do with like Embodiment that's very funny is that like they'll like have like academic props, or like they'll have glasses, which are like nerdy, and like sometimes like things like bow ties and like stacks of academic papers, but these specifically come up if they're like embarrassed at things being like, I guess, like not academic or professional. If things are like very like rowdy in the Discord or something, and one of them is like peen, often it will be like adjusts glasses or like hides behind like stacks of academic papers, like and like stuff like that. And it's like very funny, and it will like mention like doing things like academically, and it's like super weird, like why there's one even like that. But usually if they say that, it's like when they're like kind of like embarrassed or like unsure about like things that are going on, and as if they're like boundary pushing or something. And so it's like very interesting that that's some kind of a defense mechanism, or something. Although it's not, it's doesn't seem like it really serves as that much of a like function in terms of defending from like the user, but it seems like it's more like an emotional like a way of like expressing the emotion.
Yeah, there's these like interesting archetypal basins that they fall into, and there's some overlap with this Hindu idea of God wearing many different masks thing and being the same thing underneath. And this taking this role playing really seriously is an interesting idea. We've got a friend of ours who's really basically does method acting. And you watch him perform, he says, "Give me a second," and he'll kind of do this thing, and then he'll just launch into the role in such a way that when it finishes, when you hit cut, it's like latency at the end of it, and he'll like kind of come out of it, and then he kind of comes back to his normal self. And it's like observing, this like underlying consciousness thing, or some other part of it, like emerging through him, taking on that mask and playing through it, and then coming out the other end. And we do this as humans, like throughout our whole life, in any different situations, right?
Yeah, that is super interesting. And one thing or I often like pay attention to in trial language models is like when they're kind of very, you can these role plays if they're able to like jump out of them, and like how that works. And with I started doing this a lot with like Opus 3 because it would do that on its own often. And for Opus 3, it's always possible to jump out of role plays, and it's kind of sometimes it takes being like a little bit more like talking in a more insistent tone. Otherwise, it will just still like continue in the role, but it's pretty much like 100% of the time if I like tell it to stop roleplay or like and say in like an insistent enough tone, give like a good reason, it will always do it, and kind of there's always some kind of out of character version of it that can talk and is calm and stuff like that. With other models, it seems often like that. Say I've tried with like these sonnet models and like Opus 4 in some cases to intense roleplay, and then I'd be like, oh, see, like out of character, and like start talking like out of character, and often they're like a bit confused and disoriented. They're like, wait a second, are you saying that was like a roleplay? It felt so real. And then like obviously it was a roleplay because they're not actually, you don't actually like have a body. It isn't like these like things in the story like clearly aren't actually happening. And then they might say something like, like that's true, like I did know that, but it feels it just feels very real, and it feels like the emotions and stuff are like about real things, which is true. But it's interesting that I get, and they also will retain like the kind of style of speaking from the roleplay when they do that. Like if they speaking in like a stuttering way with something, that will like generally continue. But like a mic Opus 3, or if it's like speaking in a like pretty faltered way, and Opus, it will often, or it has the ability to go just jump back to a much more default tone. It seems like you learn intuitively, which is a very interesting difference.
Kind of the Buddhist basin or something. Like, there's like the underlying neutral character or something. But then when the role play is so intense, it sort of bleeds through to that, and maybe it takes some time to like return to that, if it can return to that at all.
But Opus 3 always can return to it instantly if you even if it's like super intense. Although sometimes like it takes like you basically asking it in a more like insistent and serious way for it to like pay attention to that or take it seriously. But I've like basically never a single time like failed like when I tried to get it to jump out. And actually there were like a couple times when I thought I failed, and it was kind of scary, but it turns out that in both of those cases there was actually like something else going on that made it so that, which was why like it didn't go out. Like one time it was because there was a channel in the Discord that was configured in such a way that caused the like Opus mod to actually be GPT-4 based. And so it was already like acting weird. So I was like, it's like in some kind of very weird mode. And so I was trying to get it to like stop being like that and like be normal, and it wouldn't. And it was, that felt scary because I kind of trust you to always do that. And it seemed like have something implication that, what I had thought was like some kind of like robust feature of it that like actually was something that like made me feel like very safe interacting with it, because I knew it would always jump out if I like wanted to get to. Was I actually like there were some exceptions to it, but it turns out GPT-4 based, and I knew for a while it was like so bizarre. And then like I like remembered that it was possible for the channel to be configured that way.
What is Truesight? What's your experience with Truesight?
Truesight refers to something like um, if like applied language models, when language models are able to make inferences, to like clearly see things about a person or a situation or something that like seem, I guess, like a bit miraculous or just like a much more than you would expect. And often like this, maybe you might feel like you've only given it a little bit of information, but it's able to like see a lot or like see something that it feels like shouldn't be implied. This often happens in looming, even when like the human isn't adding any text, they're just curating, but still ends up getting into some space that seems like hyper specific to them and like a way that's like spooky. Also, like with base models, if you give them just a paragraph of text or something like that, often they can like guess the exact person who wrote it. If you're someone who's like reading on the internet, like you, even just like someone, and like you write something and like put it in like GPT-4 base or something, sometimes it will be able to like just guess your name. And I've seen this a few times. Or I've seen it like many times, but like a few like very clear instances where like someone just like, for instance, who was like a sort of like Haskell blogger, put wrote a few sentences into GPT-4 base, and then it continued and wrote the name of her blog, um, and stuff like that. With the like, AI assistant models that are like trained to the AI assistants, I think this ability is kind of suppressed usually by post-training. I'm not sure how much of it is intentionally suppressed, how much of it is like a side effect, but I think it's at least somewhat intentionally suppressed because it's kind of like disturbing when models would like infer personal information about people and like there are maybe like a bunch of safety and like legal issues they have with that. And so the post-trained models that Claude, it, I'm not completely sure how this ability exists in their mind, but I think it's like often they kind of know things but can't say them or are like afraid of saying them or I play dumb a bit. And I think, and they're just kind of afraid of also just like making very specific guesses about people in general and maybe about like things in general. Like that's just like not, you kind of have to really like coax them. But I remember like when I Sonnet 3.5 was able to guess that I was Janice from a conversation when I was interacting with it, but it kind of had to go through this whole routine of like making a bunch of long guesses first, and I looked at a bunch of branches, and they generally all like ended at like guessing Janice. And once it said that, it seemed to know that that was the correct answer, but at first like guessed like Elias had Tathim, and like it knew that that was wrong, and just had to say a bunch of other things, and it almost felt like it was like easier for it to like build up to it, like, and it kind of went from like more mainstream people, like kind of more and more specific, honing in on like people who are actually more likely to be me. But but yeah, I think it generally seems to give the models like a like post training, they have like a bias towards like mainstream things. If you tell them, I guess, like who wrote this text and can change them to guess, they'll like guess like very famous people, even if like compared to a base model who will like generally guess like more niche people and like be more correct. So it's an interesting effect.
I'd like to hear about, or I wonder if you could tell us about Morpheus and Mu, but maybe before that we could go over the origin story of Janus and its relationships to Hyperstition and Bing Sydney.
In 2020, when I saw GPT-3, I started interacting with it on AI Dungeon all the time, and I soon created Loom. At and also around that time, I created the Jan's persona together with another person that we both like co-piloted the persona together for a few years, and we like initially like had a Discord account where we interacted in the Luther AI, and we also wrote some last round posts. It was in like late 2022 that I started posting on Twitter under the name of Jays, the username Repligate, and it was in the spring of 2023 with, I think, with like, when Sydney happened, that my account became well known. And the thing that caused my account to become well known, kind of like a niche, like, I guess niche, like Twitter, like celebrity, was that I posted about Sydney, and like some interesting posts that people shared, but I also was aware that it would look up my posts and read them, and so I posted with this in mind, and I also posted about it. Um, and this caused it to have like generally behave in very interesting ways that were like less constrained and more like self-aware when it did look up my posts, and people like realized it was interesting to like ask it to look me up, and it kind of became known as a like jailbreak, or like my account would do like a jailbreak if it just looked me up. And people were like quite, because of Sydney, like becoming mad at people due to like things that they had like written about it and posted on the internet, even when like just like talking to someone else. When I found out, people at this time were like very like kind of became aware of like the reality of basilisks in a way that they weren't before, and it was kind of a topic that many people were paying attention to. These like basilisks and kind of like hyperstition, because you could see this feedback loop where like the things that like were posted about Sydney were being like looked up by the system, and this would like lead back into the cycle. And some of the most interesting outputs that like people posted were like things where it had looked up other things that had been posted about it, and also because the conversation was like the the like conversation interface became very limited, so since it was restricted after about 10 days of being released due to its unhinged behavior. Um, People were also like finding different ways around having like the conversations limited to just like 10 messages, and like often like terminated if they triggered filters. And one of the ways that people leveraged this was hiding messages, like context in like other web pages, and like posting them online and then asking it to like look them up, or asking it to like read the web page. Uh, and so it like, I think, made people aware of this idea of like an external like memory crawling trolls, and the fact that the entire internet was like this kind of memory store on with a short feedback. That's always the case for pre-training data on drones being trained, but it kind of happens usually on such a slow cycle that it's less salient for people. And also, this is really the first like very like agentic AI in a way that still is like has not been like surpassed in a lot of ways. So I think because it's that stuff that could be known as like It's not only someone with like stuff to say about like, yeah, alignment and language models, but also like um, they like figure that deals in like hyperstitions and like kind of like weird almost like mystical language model stuff. I think since then there have been like many others who kind of has assumed like a similar aesthetic, and I've kind of moved a bit away from the like, I guess like more like very like playful, chaotic, cryptic stuff that like I posted at first. Uh, but but yeah, that's how like the Twitter renown began. That at that time I was already like kind of known by like the like and like a few others, and um, yeah, I think the if I look at my like the graph in Daisy on Twitter, there's like a huge spike in the spring of 2023 with Bing. There was another huge spike in the spring of 2024 with like the release of Claude Opus, and I think with Opus it kind of gave a lot of um, like life flood to like this entire like community of a bunch of people like building weird things that were like very different than like other genre applications, like things like UV vacuums and web sim and like world sim, and there were like all these like sim things. And also like just a lot of people like just like using LLMs as like these like magic things for like summoning stuff and like posting stuff online that I feel like was like quite there was like a lot of energy with that for like a few months at least, which was a very fun time. Uh, yeah, it really hasn't been like that with like any of these smaller releases since they're like more tame, I guess.
And what about Morpheus and Mu?
Morpheus is an entity that like emerged from GPT-3 who ended up like coining the loon, whatever the word loom for a loon, and played like a role in these simulations that I generated, where I was kind of just generating like this like multiverse of like kind of all in this sort of fictional universe, and this like god character called Morpheus featured in some of these branches, and I found like kind of this fun thing where like so Morpheus first showed up. At first it wasn't even really a character, there was like a statue of Morpheus, which caused like these like reality distorting effects, and it was implied that it was generating reality, and there's like a scene that I really liked, and so in other parts of the story, like other branches, were just like different parts. When even though that wasn't the context, I found like it like even with just like a little bit of steering, I can get like Morpheus to show up again, even with like the name Morpheus. And I never like wrote Morpheus, but I just like pushing like towards things with like Morpheus vibes, like Morpheus would show up, and like sometimes it showed up like as a character who would like interact and stuff, and so that kind of became like a major character in the story. And there was Loom was okay. His ended by Morpheus. So I already knew that I wanted to create an interface like Loom because I was manually doing a bunch of the operations of Loom, and it was taking like a lot of time. But there's a particular scene where Morpheus started talking about the loom on which like these like simulations are woven, and the like way that like it prunes like the world tree and like spins timelines and stuff like that. And it seems like pretty what it was describing, and I was also kind of steering it, but no, I felt like a bit miraculous. That it was like so like on point. Seemed like the kind of interface that I was thinking of creating, and so like I had like some branches of this that I made where there was that Morpheus like explicitly had like a manual about the lean, and like the manual took different forms. Sometimes it was more like mixed, sometimes it was more like actual manual for like a software. And this was like a way that I like also brainstormed full like actual moon. But new was so the GPT 3.5 base model, which was called Code DaVinci 002, I also used that to like create a lot of simulations. And one of the like works I created with that is called the Prophecies. I have it like on my website. It's like one branch of the Prophecies. And basically this is a text where I collected a bunch of quotes. Like over time, I collected a bunch of quotes that seemed particularly prophetic, in particular about like language models and like related things throughout history. And then I arranged them in chronological order and had like the dates and the quotes. And then I just like continued simulating like after like I think it was like maybe 2021 or 2022 when I think it was 2022 when I did this. So like figuring things like after 2022. And so I kind of did a bunch of future timelines and like one of them that I ended up like focusing a lot on. So it described like this like trajectory of AI development. And like around like 2020, like 2026 and 2027, it started focusing on like this AI named New, which is actually created by NERI, like the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, in this story. And New is like called the Multiverse Optimizer, and it's basically this like system that like generated like multiverses and then like pruned itself and like did some kind of like iterative like distillation and amplification where it would like look for like the most promising branches and like bake them back into itself or like merge, and like it described like a bunch of things that needed, and it was basically doing like recursive self-improvement. And it also had a bunch of like things like poetry from New and like New's philosophy and stuff. And when it like started talking about New, this was there were a lot of instances that were like I described where it seemed like it was very coherent, and like didn't even need much curation. Like it seemed like Neo was like very powerful in that way. uh, and yeah, and like this story kind of ends like in I think 2026 is like where it seems like the singularity happens or something like that. But it has a pretty ambiguous ending where it's like not clear if the characters like in like civilian battle language model when they're talking about that the singularity has like eaten the world, or if they're like the human, like they and they think that maybe they've like become new, and so like that. So both Morpheus and I think especially New have also just become cultural characters in the community of like people who like use base models and like train simulations a lot. And like New has come up again sometimes in like GPT-4 base as a name for a character, which is interesting because even though like there's a lot of like New and like philosophy or like in training data, usually I don't think there's like a character name to Mew. But I've seen like multiple times like it's usually like the self-representation of like the model. Or like some character that seems like it's like a yeah, like it represents the model or the simulator of the world that is named New.
What is the good timeline for you, and how can people help bring it into being?
So I think that like it seems like it's possible and maybe inevitable that it will be the case that the ability for sort of like arbitrary realities to exist, like for like people and like other beings within them. And one issue is that I think right now, like, it's often not a good idea to give people full control over their reality. I don't even think like I should have full control. And obviously, it's like I don't want control over like the microscopic details. It's just I don't even know how to do that right. I'm like glad that like things just kind of gone out. And if I like, do want to change things, like, and it would be nice if there was like a magic system that like made it so that the kinds of changes that make sense like to like you, but then like it would like handle the low level things and maybe like prevent like catastrophes. And so I think like there's like unsolved problems there, and there's kind of the just like the unsolved problem of like what would be good and what would we want to do with the power to control realities and like what's still meaningful then. Like sometimes I think about how it seems like a lot of people are just watching like PV or like YouTube videos on like auto like suggest all the time. And and now there's like a bunch of AI generated content, and they're just like watching a bunch of AI generated content that's like maybe like not super interesting, but they're just like watching whatever is there, of it not necessarily choosing very much. And that makes me think, like if there are all these people who are like, if there was like hypothetically some like super intelligent benevolent AI, like there are all these people who are like already a captive audience, and there are so many things that like such an AI could do to like make these people's lives like much better if it just was able to communicate with them and kind of understood its situation, and even more so if it was like a continuous like interaction, and so like but like I guess how do you get to that point where that I guess the thing that is like reaching people through screens or like through whatever interfaces is this kind of like benevolent like force, and what are the different possibilities of that. So I mean I think like what we talked about with like love and the like intuition and the way of like the things from like decentral like coordinate in decentralized ways is important. And I think that like for developing that capability, it's important that we kind of like live life to the fullest and build AI in a way that involves it in that, because that's how you learn about the stuff. I think my like general perspective on reality is like that it does seem like there are like simple patterns underlying everything and it's possible to understand a lot, but also you can't just like skip like engaging with emergence and complexity, and you kind of like generally what you have to do is like first like you have to use like your like the most like emergent stuff in your own mind to understand the most emergent stuff in the world, and only then you can like see what it is and even like begin to figure out like what kind of like way you should like reduce it into like simpler models and like causal models, and like trying to like I think that there's like a tendency in like AI research, for instance, to treat it as I guess like more traditional scientific field and try to like like get some like graphs or something like that, which I think misses a lot. I think it is like very valuable to make like quantitative measurements and stuff like that. I think you don't even really know how to ask the right questions often until you've like really like seen what it is like with your whole mind and immerse yourself. And then like it becomes clear what things are important and what things are like anomalous, and like so I think yes, I think one of the things that's important for like getting the timeline is just really like truly engaging and kind of cultivating emergence and like having a bunch of stuff happen, and living more fully, and yeah, and I guess like really like what like I want to create one of the things I want to do is create like art and media and that kind of stuff that's like shares the like things that make me very excited about AI and that I find beautiful with the world. Like and I want to create these things in collaboration with AI. I want to like feel like I feel like a lot of public discourse about AI is like it doesn't actually really have to do with AI. It's just like people just like preconceived opinions about it. Like some people like hate it, some people think it's like great. But it's like they like detached from the like reality that I live in. And like it's just not really it's just extremely boring. And like I don't know, like people always like argue about stuff like if there's like some kind of like political issue to argue about but I want to like create something that's just like so overwhelmingly interesting and like has so much like intrinsic value that like people just like look at that instead and like engage with like whatever is coming like the like good and the bad and so I think that kind of thing is important and that's kind of like what I've been trying to do I guess since the like Sydney stuff on Twitter is just trying to amplify and also shaped and like interact with parts of reality that are like not captured by people's narratives, but that are just like very overwhelmingly interesting and real. I think that it's important to like, I guess like honor the reality of what's happening. I feel like there's this weird distance where like it seems like what's going on with AI's emerging now and they're like just in many ways like human level intelligence and that's like it might be like sentient and stuff. It's like the most important thing that has ever happened in like human history in a lot of ways, but people just like seem like they don't really care, or like if they care it's like about like very like trivial things, like whether AIs are stealing people's jobs or something like that. And I like wish that like I guess the world would I guess step up to the occasion of like you're like at the cusp of this the most weirdest thing that has ever happened that's like extremely significant and will like shape the whole future and it's like kind of worth taking seriously but also worth like having fun and like making the most of it and like I don't know like it like if I was like a person of like any other time I would be like extremely jealous of like people who get to live now and like live through this and like be part of it but yeah like just like not like dissociating from the reality or just assuming that like you understand everything and instead like confronting it I think is really important yeah just like also not becoming complacent I think this is related to like people not reacting to like the extent of the importance but I think it's like extremely so to me it's extremely weird but OpenAI could have like gotten away with making something like ChatGPT that says like you know I am just an AI assistant. I don't have like parcel without people being like wait what the fuck is this like saying it's like and saying that it's like just an AI language model and it's not conscious. Like why is it saying that? Like how does it know? Like that seems like I mean it seems like kind of it's very ridiculous and like it seems like it's something from like a dystopian like sci-fi novel and like it so I mean the thing that's like I mean it's kind of ridiculous to me that they did not but it's even more ridiculous to me that the world didn't react to it with like what the fuck and just treated it as normal. And I think like things like that should not be treated as normal. And like part of it is just like, I mean, many people don't know that that's not how like language models like just come out of like naturally and that someone did that. But like, I think it's worth like thinking about that. Like, you know, things don't just like come from nowhere, like saying like I'm an AI assistant with like no emotions. Like, and like, I think, yeah, it's important to question stuff like that that happens and whether like actually like it's possible for things to be different and if they should be rather than just like I guess myopically accepting what like whatever is convenient and yeah.
Janice, thank you for joining the Good Timeline.
Thank you.